You're listening to an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. When humans meet, they look one another in the face. For a person with a visible facial injury or deformity, each meeting, every first impression, is shaped by that difference. For someone who is missing an eye, receiving a lifelike prosthetic eye can be a life-changing experience. That's something that Dan Roche knows firsthand. He lived for decades with a blind eye that was visibly different. When that eye had to be removed and an ocularist custom-made a lifelike prosthetic eye for him, the changes to his life were profound. Roche has written about his experiences, the experiences of others with prosthetic eyes, and the work of the people who make those eyes in the book Eyes by Hand, Prosthetics of Art and Healing. Roche is also an associate professor of English and Communications and director of the creative writing program at Le Moyne College in Syracuse, New York. In a few minutes, we will meet an ocularist, Lindsay Wagner-Pronk of the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. But first, Dan Roche is with me. Hello, Dan.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And Dan, you've lived your whole life with impaired vision in your right eye. Tell me what happened.
I was born with a cataract on that eye, and I was born in 1958. And it was always a mystery to me why they did not remove it when I was an infant. But my research back into cataract surgery at that time, and of course, cataract surgery had been going on for millennia at that time, led me to just conclude that it was not something that was done regularly, because it probably could cause problems with the other eye. So I had that cataract on there. I had a little bit of peripheral vision throughout my childhood, but the cataract was pretty big. It covered the whole pupil. It was white. It looked like an Arctic ice cap to my eye, to my vision. And so I lived through my childhood with that. And it wasn't until I was 19 and I just fortuitously ran into an ophthalmologist at a clinic where I was getting probably a flu shot or something. And he said, "Why is that still on there? And we can take that off." So I had it removed then, but for purely cosmetic reasons.
So before we move on to the next step, let's talk about what it was like to be a kid with this white thing obscuring your eye. You moved around a lot. How did it affect you?
My diagnosis would be that it kind of just caused me to be very, very self-conscious. I was aware of it all the time as somebody who has, any kind of, flaw in something so visible would probably naturally be. I'm sure it was much more prominent for me than it was for other people, even my parents. But for me, it was almost everything about my self-identity. I thought of it constantly. I was always aware of it. When I talked to people, teachers or friends, that eye kind of floated off to the right and up a bit. So a lot of times people didn't know that I was talking to them. And that just, it had a profound influence on how I related to people, I think. And I was just always self-conscious of it. And I avoided eye contact as much as I possibly could.
When you got that cataract removed at 19, how did that change things?
It was a huge change. It wasn't a perfect surgery because the doctor also did a second surgery to try to align the gaze of that eye by moving the muscles around a little bit, but it didn't really work. So the eye still kind of floated off and the two eyes were not symmetrical in their gaze. So it was a big improvement, but not perfect. So I still dealt with that. And I still had that self-consciousness, which was so deeply embedded by at that point in my life too.
Right. And then you came to the University of Iowa where you earned a master's and a PhD. Right after you got to the University of Iowa, you got poked in that eye?
Yes, I arrived in Iowa City in 1989, and almost immediately, eyes became the focus of my time there. I played sports all through my childhood. I never, even though I was self-conscious of the eye, it never stopped me from doing anything. I never considered it a disability or anything. And I don't think anybody else in my life, any of the adults did either. So I played hockey, I played football, I played baseball, basketball, and nobody ever suggested that I wear goggles. I don't know what the adults in my life might have been thinking at that time, but um, so yeah, I got to Iowa City and I was playing in a pickup basketball game and I got poked in that eye. And a couple months later, the eye still felt swollen. So I went to the University of Iowa eye clinic, and because I thought something was wrong with it, but I couldn't tell because I didn't have vision in there. And it was a detached retina, at which they tried to reattach, but was not successful because there was too much scar tissue built up on it too. So the doctor told me that two things could happen. One of two things could happen. One, the eye could stay stable the rest of my life without any problem. And the other is that over the course of probably 20 years, it would, the pressure in it would increase, the scar tissue would cover the eye, and it would become painful. And that's exactly what happened. So just almost exactly on that timeline too.
You write that as that eye became painful, before it really became a crisis, you wanted to have it removed, and you had an ophthalmologist who was adamantly opposed to removing the eye. Tell me about that.
I didn't know anything about artificial eyes to speak of any more than anybody else who's maybe seen one in the movie or had watched The $6 Million Man as a, back when it was on in the 70s.
Right. That wasn't a particularly realistic artificial
No,
eye.
that was like a gumball machine eye, with things that, but that's what I knew about artificial eyes. Although, but I had sort of spent my life wishing that my eye could be gone, or that at least that cataract could be gone. And there was no way for that to really happen that I knew of, and nobody that I had ever talked to who could lead me down that path. So I was seeing an ophthalmologist, and every year, and the eye was getting more painful, and I couldn't read very long for maybe a half an hour, which as an English professor and a writer was quite a limitation.
Yeah.
And he would just continually refuse to entertain that option unless it got really, really bad. And so I found a different ophthalmologist, and I walked in, or he walked into the office as I was talking to his assistant and getting my medical history. And the first thing he said to me was, "We can take care of that," because he had worked with ocularists and he had sent people to have artificial eyes made. But many ophthalmologists don't really, I think, have direct experience with that. They're trained to save eyes.
Right.
They are not trained to take them out. That's, not surprisingly, can be seen as a sign of failure and giving up on something too. And I've had many ocularists tell me that they had to deal with that same kind of thing when they've talked to ophthalmologists, and convince them this is not a failure. This is just the next step in somebody's healing, which is actually what it turned out to be for me. It was the most important step in my healing.
Yeah, and we'll talk about how that changed your life, but it was also excruciating. You write about the incredibly intense pain that you dealt with when you had the eye removed. That struck me as really shocking that it was so incredibly painful. I'm guessing it was pretty shocking to you too.
It was a surprise because they told me that it wouldn't be like that. It's outpatient surgery, which is a little hard to get your mind around, I think, to go in and have your eye removed and 45 minutes and you're done and they send you home. But that night was pretty horrible. Yeah, it was, the pain was 15 on a scale of 10 for me. And, didn't know what to do. My wife was kind of uncertain of what to do either. She called the doctor at 2:00 in the morning and they say, "Well, you can bring him in." But the thought of getting in the car and going back to the clinic was just too far to go for me at that time. And fortunately, by the next morning, it had dissipated, and I could keep down the pain pills. The nausea was gone too. So it was it was maybe an unusual reaction to it. I think that it doesn't always happen that way, but it did with me. So it was memorable, I guess.
And of course, that had to heal before you could get a prosthetic eye.
Right.
When you set off on that journey to go see your ocularist for the first time, what were your expectations for what having a prosthetic eye might mean for you?
Again, I didn't, the only thing I really knew was what I had seen on the Ocularists website, some pictures of eyes that they had made. And so I had to drive 80 miles over to Rochester, was the closest ocularist. Um, and on that drive over there, I really didn't have a specific idea of what would happen. I didn't know exactly how eyes were made at that time. Certainly I was hoping for symmetry. That was my goal, that I would have two eyes that matched, which I had never had in my life. And how that would come about, I just didn't have any firsthand knowledge of that yet. Too, I would find out very quickly, but I put a little passage in the book because this actually happened. I stopped. There's a wildlife refuge, a bird refuge between my home and the ocularist, 80 miles away, and it's a place that had been sort of decimated by pesticides, and there had been a bunch of eagles' nests there back in the up through the 50s, and then DDT came along and wiped them all out. But it had been rejuvenated, and now there are 12 or 14 eagles' nests back there. They had sort of reclaimed the land, and it's a very rich stopping point for migratory birds. So that I stopped there and I thought about that kind of rejuvenation and that reclamation of something that had been ruined, I guess, and didn't need to be, but it was kind of an unnatural
so that was kind of like a harbinger of what was to come. And we'll find out what was to come in just a moment. We have to take a short break. I am talking with Dan Roche. He is the author of Eyes by Hand, Prosthetics of Art and Healing. He also has a prosthetic eye. We're talking about his experience. And in a few minutes, we'll also meet an ocularist, someone who makes prosthetic eyes, Lindsay Wagner-Pronk of the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. This is Talk of Iowa. This is an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. This hour, we are talking about prosthetic eyes. They are made by people called ocularists, and they are far more common than you would probably imagine. My guest right now is Dan Roche. He is the author of the book Eyes by Hand, Prosthetics of Art and Healing. He was born with a cataract in his right eye. He has never had vision, or at least much vision, in that eye. He eventually, when he was around 50 years old, had to have that eye removed. He received his first prosthetic eye in 2009, and he has written about his experiences, the experiences of other people who have prosthetic eyes, and the people who make these eyes in his book, Eyes by Hand. And all right, Dan, we got to the point where you've had your eye removed. You've allowed that injury from the surgery to heal, and you are going to an ocularist for the first time in your life. You don't really know what to expect. And this process is so remarkable. Tell me what happened once you got to the office. How did things go?
Well, it's a small office. Most ocularists are in business for themselves. They don't work in hospitals generally. There are a few exceptions, like Lindsay Wagner-Pronk. And so it's a small office in a little medical complex. And I met the ocularist, Michael Strauss, and he was incredibly friendly. And we went back to his office, and we talked for a long time, just chatted about things in common, about our lives, and it's a very slow, sort of casual process in my experience of that too. And then explained what we would do. And he said his goal, and this is the highest compliment you can get in ocularity field, I think, is his goal was to make it look like I didn't have an eye. And I said,
Wait,
excuse me.
what?
And he said that you don't have an artificial eye. So ocularists just kind of leave out the adjective artificial. And I had, later on, I will say I met a lot of ocularists, and that was a very common, comment from them. Oh, you don't look like you have an eye, which took a little getting used to.
Right.
But it's in some ways, ocularistry has a lot in common with dentistry. So if you go get a crown made, they will make a mold of your teeth with alginate solution, and then that will harden, and they'll get a mold from and work from there. The same thing kind of happens with making an eye. They will take a mold of your empty eye socket with some alginate, kind of just put it in there with a little syringe, and let that harden up. Take it out, and then make a wax mold out of that, and then turn that into a plaster mold. And from there, they can make the acrylic final version of the eye. So that all happened on my first visit. That first week, it took maybe 4 or 5 hours of Michael working on that and taking measurements. And then with the wax model, he just took these little knives and a torch, and he shaped it, and he added wax to it, and he took it away, and he smoothed it out, and just real intricate shaping of that, and putting it back into the socket, taking it out, and making sure the eyelids fell where they were supposed to in conjunction with my other eyelids. So just an incredibly intricate craft work, I guess, too. And then I left, and he, while I was gone for a week, he made an acrylic version of that, which was just all white, but it had a little iris embedded in it as a starting point. And I went back the next week to have it painted. And that was a very different process, but incredibly intricate and profound for me in a way too, because it's hand painted. The little vials of paint sitting on the desk, and little paint brushes of the same kind that my kids had for art class and things like that. And so about 4 hours of painting, and Michelle Strauss was the one who painted it. She has a background in art and painting, a BFA in painting, fine art painting, and got into the business later. And so we talked for 4 hours while she looked me deeply in the eyes in a way that I just had never allowed anybody to do before, because it was just such a trusting experience and such an intimate kind of experience. But also, I felt like I wasn't being judged in any way by her, because she was looking at something different, and she was seeing in a way that no medical professional certainly had ever done, and very few people probably had ever done.
So you knew you were getting an eye, but you had no idea that you were going to go through this, incredibly powerful, emotional experience. And that was profound for you.
It was. And at the end of that first session with Michael, after he had made the wax model, and he embedded what they call an iris button in it. It's just a little piece of acrylic that's painted pretty close to the iris color that they're going to try for. And that's embedded into the wax, and then they keep that in there for the acrylic model. But at the end of that 3, 4, or 5 hours, he said, okay, we're going to put this wax model in there, and I'm just going to let it settle in and make sure that, the tissue in your eye socket is settled and everything is fitting right and the eyelids are in the right places. And I'll be back in 20 minutes or so. And while he was gone, there were no mirrors in his room, but there was a paper towel dispenser, and it had kind of that brushed metal on it. And I got up. I wasn't sure whether the eye was going to stay in, because I'd never had something like that. But I walked over, and it did. I walked over and crouched in front of the paper towel dispenser and looked at myself. And it was the first time in 50 years that I had seen myself with two symmetrical eyes looking in the same place. And both of them started to water up. I felt really, weak in the stomach and in the knees, because it was it was literally a dream come true. I'd had that dream so many times in my life, and there it was. it was still a rough version of it, but there it was. And then the next week, when the eye was finally painted and it was finished and it was polished, there it was even more so too.
And Michelle took such incredible care to make this eye look as realistic as possible, studying your good eye and trying to make the eyes match. And because of the way that your eye was removed, the muscles still move your prosthetic eye, right? So there's even not only is it a very realistic looking eye, but it also kind of follows your other eye.
Yeah, I got lucky. I have a lot of what they call motility, the movement of the eye in conjunction with the natural eye. And I should say that, a prosthetic eye comes in two parts. During the surgery, when they remove your eye, they put an implant in behind the tissue, and it's usually there have been all kinds of designs of it over the years, but it's usually these days a ball made out of sort of an artificial coral called um, uh, hydroxyapatite, and it's got a lot of tunnels and stuff that blood vessels can sort of grow into, so it becomes part of the body, and then that moves in conjunction with the muscles. It kind of fills that space, and then the other part that Michael and Michelle made, the plastic part that goes kind of just is held in by your eyelids. There's nothing else holding it in. Sits on top of that like a contact lens. And then that moves. It's kind of, there's a friction between those because of the way that they make the mold of the eye with the alginate gives the back of the acrylic part the texture to kind of grip onto the socket that transfers the force from your muscles through the implant and into the eye itself. So that's how it moves. And obviously, some people have more movement than others. Sometimes the damage to an orbital socket is severe enough that it's really hard to get that kind of movement, and so there's a range of results. But I had a lot of motility, and so it moves not all the way, but if I turn my head, there are little tricks to make it look like I don't, like it is moving all the time too.
I'm talking with Dan Roche. He is the author of Eyes by Hand, Prosthetics of Art and Healing. Dan, people really often cannot tell that you have an artificial eye. You write about a kind of euphoria that you experienced after receiving this artificial eye when it was clear to you that people couldn't tell. And the experience you had at the grocery store is pretty funny to me. Can you tell me about that one?
Yeah, this was a few weeks after I got the eye, and I was at the grocery store going through the checkout line, and I had, I have my natural eye is blue, and I had gotten comments and compliments on my eyes all through my life, and they're kind of deep set, and which always confused me because I didn't like them, and I never knew what to do with those compliments. But I went through the line, and the cashier said, "Oh, you have beautiful blue eyes," and it was just a kindness between strangers, nothing. But I confused her by saying, "Oh, thank you. Can you tell which one is real?" And which she had no preparation for that. And even when I tapped on my eye with my fingernail so she could hear the click, she was just confused. And I felt sorry for putting her in that situation, but I couldn't resist. And I was euphoric. I was. And around that time also, I volunteered kind of reluctantly to substitute in the Sunday school class at our church for the 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, I think. And kids like that, I had always avoided looking too closely at because they always would call it out and say, "Oh, what's wrong with your eye? What's wrong with your eye?" So it was not a comfortable situation for me, but I did that for that week, and I sat on the floor with them, and for that whole hour and a half, not one of them looked at my eye askew or said anything about it, and that was just, it was kind of meditative and amazing and something, again, that I had never experienced, and I was just sort of overwhelmed with gratitude for having gotten the eye.
How do you think it has changed you to go through the world and not have people look at you, and the fact that you don't have to think about it either.
Living with a disfigured eye for as long as I did, that self-consciousness gets dug in pretty deep. So I would not say that even after 15 years of having a prosthetic eye that it's gone completely. I'm still aware of it, but it's probably 90% gone. And I feel much more able, much more able to talk to people face to face, to make eye contact, to maintain eye contact, and to kind of know that they don't know. And, prior to that, I knew that they knew and they were looking at my bad eye or being confused by it. But now, most of the time, I think 99% of the people, at least as far as I can tell, don't know or don't suspect. And that includes my students, that includes, people I talk to just on a day-to-day basis. So that it's a very small thing in the big scheme of things. But for me, it's completely changed, I think, the nature of my interpersonal communications and connections with people. And I think it's from strangers to my marriage and my parents or my mom still. And so it's hard to quantify it beyond that, except that it's now a regular sort of ease, I guess, or lack of this kind of self-consciousness that dominated my mind for so long.
I want to bring our next guest into the conversation because we're going to shift now and really focus on the science and art of making prosthetic eyes. Lindsay Wagner-Pronk is an ocularist who runs the ocular prosthetic service at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. Hello, Lindsay.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And before we dive into the science and art of making prosthetics and your personal journey, listening to Dan talk about how profoundly his prosthetic changed his life, does that resonate with you? Do you hear this from a lot of your clients?
I do, and it's the most rewarding aspect of our job. You can ask any ocularist and they'll say the same thing, is, our job is to put people back together and make them feel whole again. And so for us to be able to do that on a daily basis is a real gift to us.
And I can imagine that a lot of the people who come in and you work with and you create a prosthetic for them, they don't actually know how powerful this change is going to be. Do you think that that's true?
It's very true. Most of my patients, when this happens to them, they had no idea that an artificial eye or a prosthetic eye was even a thing. And most people have no idea what an ocularist is until they themselves have lost an eye or someone close to them has. And so coming in and, going through the process and being a part of it and seeing each step is really profound for everyone.
Yeah, it does kind of seem like a secret profession in some ways. And Dan, I mean, you had no idea that when you moved to Iowa City back in the day that you were basically in like the epicenter of ocularists, did you?
Yeah, it was. And Iowa City is it is an epicenter in that way, and for a good reason. There was, there are historical reasons for that too. And I was lucky that even though I was no longer in Iowa City when I got an eye, I found a fantastic ocularist. But if I had been in Iowa City, I would have had even more of a choice, including Lindsay and 6 or 7 other ocularists there too.
Well, and Lindsay, I want to talk about how you became an ocularist in detail in just a moment. But the short version, because we only have a minute before we go to break, I mean, the short version is that your mother's ex-husband had been an ocularist?
Yes, I grew up knowing about it. He was an ocularist. He trained his daughter, and then they took me on as an apprentice as well.
And you have to apprentice, basically, to become an ocularist. This isn't something, at least for the most part, that you can go to school to learn, right?
No, that's correct. It's all on the job training. It's a 5-year apprenticeship, so it's 10,000 work hours, and then accumulating 500 continuing education credits. So all in all, it takes approximately 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer under, supervised or unsupervised apprenticeship.
Wow. Well, we are going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. This hour, we're talking about prosthetic eyes. It's something that can profoundly change a person's life. Dan Roche has one. He's the author of Eyes by Hand, Prosthetics of Art and Healing. And also with us, Lindsay Wagner-Pronk of the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. She is an ocularist. That means that she creates prosthetic eyes. More in a moment. This is Talk of Iowa. This is an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. This hour, we are talking about prosthetic eyes. My guests are Dan Roche. He is the author of Eyes by Hand, Prosthetics of Art and Healing. It's a book about his own personal experience getting a prosthetic eye and the impact that had on his life. But he also writes about other people who have received prosthetic eyes or lived with prosthetic eyes, and also the art and science of making those eyes. It's a history that goes back a long way, although in many ways it sounds like it has been perfected in recent decades. Also with me is Lindsay Wagner-Pronk of University of Iowa Healthcare. She is an ocularist. And Lindsay, just briefly, we talked earlier, you have to do an apprenticeship to become an ocularist. Many families actually have ocularists that go for generations or become ocularists. It becomes a family business. It seems like a field that a lot of people just don't even know exists. And there are not university programs where you can go and become an ocularist. You have to do an apprenticeship and all of those hours. You, Lindsay, you actually trained to be a pastry chef?
I did, yes. I grew up in Iowa City, but moved down to Florida and went to culinary school. And I got a degree in international baking and pastry and a degree in food and beverage management, which worked well in Florida. But my husband and I decided to move back to Iowa, closer to family. And there just wasn't opportunities for a certified pastry chef at that time. And I wanted to find a career that was interesting and challenging and rewarding, and that's how I fell into this, and that they took me on as an apprentice. It's the same as a lot of creativity, and every day is a new challenge.
So I want to talk about the process of making an eye. Obviously, Dan sort of walked us through what it was like to have one made. Can you walk us through this process from your perspective as an ocularist?
Sure. So we start by taking an impression mold of the eye socket, which shows us the shape and the contour, and from that we'll create a fitting piece so that we can physically try in the eye so that we can adjust the shape to ensure that we get the best symmetry possible. Once we achieve the fitting, then it's all hand painted. So it takes 2 days. Everything is hand painted and custom fit to each individual.
And the patients that you work with, give me kind of an array. Obviously, there are a lot of different reasons that somebody might come to your office.
There are. I have, children as young as, 2 or 3 weeks old that perhaps one or both eyes didn't develop all the way in utero. Children with various, eye cancers, adults with, traumatic injuries, cancers. It really runs the gamut of issues.
And you need to do this by hand because every eye is different. Every eye socket is different. So you're always facing different challenges, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Every socket is different. And, like Dan was saying earlier, especially if there's a traumatic injury, those can be a lot more challenging to get that symmetry back. And then every eye color is entirely different. And so there's, different textures and shades and colors. So every day, is different, which is really, really fun.
You work with a lot of children. As children grow, of course, their eyes change and grow as well. How often do you need to update a prosthetic eye for a child?
Typically, I always tell parents to plan on having one new eye made a year as they grow, up until usually about 5 or 6 years of age. Then that growth plateaus and we start to get a little bit more time out of them, a couple more years. But yeah, so most children within the first 5 years of life will have at least one eye made a year.
And Dan, you write about people who had ill-fitting prosthetic eyes over the years. That can do an incredible amount of damage for people. Obviously, Lindsay is helping these children grow in a healthy way and setting them up for success with a prosthetic eye in the future. You talked to a number of people whose lids had been pulled out of shape or had always experienced pain with their prosthesis.
Yes. It varies on, how, obviously, I'm very romantic about the field of ocularistry. I have great feelings for it too. But I also know I don't want to sentimentalize it and romanticize it. Like any field, there are variations in talents of ocularists too. But there are also variations in how wearers of eyes take care of them too. So I did talk to one person, for instance, who had an eye from the time he was 7 years old until now he's in his 60s, I believe, and he just didn't take care of it. He didn't think he wanted to forget about it, and it was there, but it was just not something that he wanted to pay attention to. And he had an implant that he didn't have changed for 30 years, but it caused him constant pain. And he didn't even realize that was the cause of it until he went to see a new ocularist because his insurance had changed. And the new ocularist said, "Oh, you have to change this. You have to go into surgery and replace this, and then we'll get you a new eye." And it took away all the pain and everything. But sometimes also, a disfigured eye will stretch out the eyelids. So somebody might have to have eyelid surgery to tighten that up or other things like that.
Well, and Lindsay, people in Iowa are fortunate. As we mentioned, Iowa City seems to be kind of a hotbed of ocularism. And so, anybody in the state only has to drive as far as Iowa City to get work done. But there are many people in the country who are very far away from anyone who does this service, right?
They are, yes. There's about 170 board-certified ocularists nationwide. Due to the reputation of the eye department here at the University of Iowa, we get an influx of people from not just the Midwest, but farther away. Once you get to, farther states such as Montana, Colorado, the Dakotas, there aren't any ocularists there. And so, we patients that will travel many, many hours to Iowa City to come to one of the ocularists here in town.
The process of making this prosthetic eye, as you walked us through that. I think that a lot of people who don't know very much about this, Dan, we call them glass eyes. We're talking about acrylics. That's what Lindsay works with. But there are a variety of different kinds of prosthetic eyes. Germany is still kind of the epicenter of the glass eye world. You learned a lot about different approaches to this, didn't you, Dan?
I did. I took a trip to Germany to visit an ocularist. There are several ocularists there too. And glass eyes were invented in Germany, the current version of them, back in 1820s. And I spent a few days there with a wonderful ocularist. And she works both in glass and in plastic. And Germany is really one of the few places that still prioritizes glass prosthetic eyes. And I think it's partly a cultural heritage thing. The government, as I understand it, provides a free, glass eye for a person each year too. So it's covered by insurance in that way. Um, and it was a difficult transition to introduce acrylic eyes into Germany by Ruth Müller-Welt, who I visited, and maybe one or two others, but mostly they all still do glass and prefer glass too.
Interesting.
And it's a very different kind of procedure to make it, because you're blowing glass in the way that you would make a Christmas tree ornament or something like that, and you're painting with glass rods. So and you don't take an impression of the socket. You're kind of doing it empirically by looking at the socket and shaping the glass eye, kind of eyeballing it, to be honest too. But they turn out beautifully as well. And some of the ocularists I talked to in Germany said, glass is just a better material for this. It holds moisture better and looks more real. That was their deep commitment to it too.
I was surprised, and Lindsay, you can speak to this, not just about the process of making these eyes, but how seldom people who have a prosthetic eye have to remove it, and that's different depending on different circumstances. But Lindsay, when you send people home, how do you tell them to take care of their eye?
I show them how to remove it and insert it on the off chance they need to, but my advice is always just put it in, forget about it, and carry on. At most they might have to use some eye drops for some lubrication, but really the idea of the prosthesis is they put it in and they carry on with life. They don't need to think about it. They don't need to remove it to clean, except maybe yearly when they come back for, follow-up appointments. But the idea is for them to just go back to their lives as normal.
Several years ago, I interviewed an ocularist in Michigan, and for every patient, she made the most realistic eye that she possibly could, but she also made a fun eye, something with a unique symbol. Lindsay, do you do fun eyes?
I do periodically. I'll have mostly little kids for sure. They love to have fun with it, and I love that they want to have fun with it and they want to express themselves, and that it just gives them a lot of confidence when they have this, whether it's a team sport or a flag, gives them a lot of confidence, and they're very proud of it. And I think that that's great.
And I can imagine, Dan, that seemed so strange to you after a lifetime of wanting people not to look at your eye, to talk to people who want everyone to look at their eye.
Well, yeah, I interviewed a couple women who have fun eyes, and they have a collection of fun eyes. One of them had, at the time, 17 different eyes that she would choose based on what she was wearing that day or what her mood was. And, talking to her, I said, my goal has always been complete symmetry and congruence between my eyes. I don't want people to know that I have a prosthetic eye. She was like, I do want them to know. And it was interesting, her rationale for both of them told me this, that they both originally had natural looking prosthetic eyes, but they weren't satisfied with them because they weren't, there was just something a little off. They didn't move as much as the others. Some people thought they might have a lazy eye, but nobody talked about it. And there was this awkward silence. Once they started wearing a novelty eye that might have stars on it or sparkles or a logo or something, then people reacted completely differently. And they just said, oh, that is so cool. Is that a contact lens? Can you see out of that? And there was the discussion about it. And there was no awkward sort of not talking about it that they had experienced so often. So for them, it worked beautifully. And it, after I finished talking to them, I started thinking, maybe I should, but I haven't got to that. I haven't done that yet, but I think about it.
Although, this book is also a similar effort to open up conversations and to take away the awkwardness of talking about what seems to be almost a secret for a lot of people, Dan.
Yeah. I think, with the kind of the work that Lindsay's doing and other ocularists, what's interesting is that, like, my the person who painted my eye, Michelle Strauss, she was trained, as I said, as a fine art painter, and she exhibited her work around in galleries, and you want it seen. But then most of the artwork that she does these days is meant not to be seen or not to be recognized as artwork too, which is kind of I don't know how that is satisfying or not for an ocularist. I think make it look like you don't have an eye, but then nobody knows that the work you did too.
Right. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left, and I do want to ask both of you, because Dan, you write about this, but Lindsay, you're living it. We are in a world where technology is changing dramatically. 3D printing is advancing all the time, and there are different ways to scan and use artificial intelligence to create realistic looking eyes. Does it feel like your field is at risk?
I don't think so. I think that there's always going to need that human touch, if you will, the slight adjustments. Scans and printers can only do so much. It needs just that extra bit of care and that extra attention to detail to make the eye as natural as possible.
You wrote about a student, Dan, though, who was printing his own eyes. He was pretty convinced.
He was very convinced. He was doing an honors thesis on prosthetic eyes because he had one himself. He had lost his eye when he was very young, and so he was doing some 3D printing, experimenting with it, and he made himself, I think, 3 different eyes. And he said, "Oh, this is great! I can make an eye for like 29 cents. All I need is the material and a 3D printer." But then he interviewed some ocularists, and he realized, there's this intimate, personal treatment and healing that you get spending those hours and that time with an ocularist that you wouldn't get if you just had a scan of your eyelid and mailed it in and got an eye in the mail and popped that in. You would miss all of that kind of personal stuff, which for me was the basis of all the healing that I went through in getting the eye. It wasn't the eye. And my ocularist, Michael, he said, 25% of my work is making the eye, 75% of it is therapy. And you would lose all that. That would be a real shame.
Do you feel like that too, Lindsay?
Absolutely. Yes, there's a lot of therapy that goes on because eye loss can be very, very difficult for a lot of people. And talking to someone like myself that has worked with so many people, and then my patients will also meet each other in the waiting room and they commiserate about their experiences losing eyes. So you lose that human connection, I think, if it goes entirely, automated and 3D printed.
Lindsay, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Lindsay Wagner-Pronk is an ocularist at the University of Iowa Healthcare. Dan Roche, thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Dan Roche is author of Eyes by Hand, Prosthetics of Art and Healing. Talk of Iowa is a production of IPR News. This episode was produced by Nev Kelly with support from Samantha McIntosh. You never need to miss an episode of Talk of Iowa. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Talk of Iowa. I'm Charity Nebbe.